When a struggling single father opened his door to a freezing homeless girl, he had no idea who she really was. But the next morning, black cars showed up, and everything he thought he knew changed forever. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. It was freezing outside, the kind of cold that cuts through your jacket, your bones, and your heart. Derek, a hard-working single father, was wrapping up dinner with his 10-year-old son, Malik, in their modest kitchen. The heater clicked on and off, struggling to fight the bitter chill that had crept into the house through old windows and thin walls. Malik was mid-laugh at one of his dad's corny jokes when a sudden knock echoed through the small home. Derek paused. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not at this hour. Not in this weather. He stood up cautiously and walked to the door. As he opened it, a blast of cold air rushed in, and standing there was a shivering teenage girl. Maybe 15, maybe 16. She was soaked from head to toe, her thin sweater clinging to her like a second skin. Her shoes were muddy, her eyes red and puffy from crying or the cold, or maybe both. Please, she stammered. I just need somewhere warm for the night. Derek's first instinct was to say no. Not because he didn't care, but because he was scared. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what kind of trouble she might bring. But then he looked at Malik. His son had come to stand beside him, gripping his dad's hand. The boy's wide eyes weren't filled with fear, they were filled with compassion. Derek looked back at the girl, and his heart softened. Come in, he said quietly. You can stay the night. Inside, the warmth of the house slowly brought color back to the girl's cheeks. Malik handed her a blanket, and Derek rushed to get a dry towel and an old hoodie from his closet. They found out her name was Alyssa. She had run away from a group home a few towns over. She didn't say much about why, just that she couldn't take it anymore. The yelling, the neglect, the feeling of being invisible. Derek didn't press. He could see the weight in her eyes. She'd been through more than any teenager should. While Malik played quietly in the corner, Derek heated up a bowl of soup. It was supposed to be lunch for tomorrow, but he didn't think twice. Alyssa needed it more. She took the bowl with trembling hands, whispering, "Thank you," like no one had said a kind word to her in weeks. That night, Derek gave her the couch and an extra pillow. Malik asked if Alyssa would be there in the morning. Derek just smiled and said, "We'll see." He barely slept. His mind raced with questions. Was he doing the right thing? What if someone came looking for her? What if he got in trouble for harboring a runaway? But deep down, he knew sometimes doing the right thing wasn't about safety or rules. It was about humanity. The next morning, Alyssa was still asleep when Derek called a friend of his, a social worker he trusted. He explained the situation and asked if there was a way to help without sending her right back to the same group home. To his surprise, the friend said he'd look into it immediately. When Alyssa woke up, she looked calmer, lighter, like she had finally exhaled after holding her breath for too long. "I don't know why you helped me," she said softly, sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Derek looked at her for a moment, then nodded toward Malik, who was drawing with crayons. "Because if my son was ever lost or cold or scared, I'd hope someone would open their door too." In the days that followed, things moved fast. The social worker came by, listened to Alyssa's story, promised to help her find a better place, maybe even a foster home with a real family. Alyssa didn't say much, but her eyes glistened with silent gratitude. On her last night in the house, she hugged Malik tight and whispered, "Thank you for sharing your dad." Then she turned to Derek. "I'll never forget what you did for me." He smiled, a little choked up. "Just promise me one thing." She tilted her head. "Pay it forward. Someday, when someone knocks on your door, you'll remember." And as she walked out into the morning sun, no longer shivering, no longer alone, Derek knew something had changed. Not just for her, but for all of them. Because sometimes a single act of kindness can warm more than a frozen heart. It can spark hope. The girl introduced herself as Sophie. She looked about 16, tall for her age, with hollow cheeks, dark circles under her eyes, and a voice so soft it could barely rise above the wind. She wore a thin hoodie, jeans that were ripped more from wear than style, and no bag. No phone, no coat, no answers, just lost. She barely spoke during dinner. Every bite seemed cautious, like she hadn't eaten in days and couldn't believe the food was real. She didn't touch the chicken much, but finished every bit of rice and drank 2 glasses of water like it was gold. After every few bites, she whispered, "Thank you," without lifting her head, once to Derek, once to Malik, once to no one in particular. The kind of thank you that felt like it came from a place of fear and relief. Derek didn't push her for answers. He just nodded and smiled kindly. After clearing the plates, he made up the couch for her with an old but clean blanket, fluffed a pillow, and handed her a steaming cup of tea. Malik had already changed into his pajamas and was standing near the living room, peeking in. "Dad," he whispered, tugging on Derek's sleeve. "Who is she? Why was she out there?" Derek crouched down and looked his son in the eye. "Sometimes," he said gently, "people just need help, son. And when we can give it, we do." Malik nodded slowly, as if trying to understand something too big for a 10-year-old mind. Then he waved to Sophie shyly. She smiled faintly and waved back. That night, as Sophie lay curled on the couch, blanket pulled tight to her chin, she tried to hide the sound of her quiet sobs. But Derek heard her. He didn't interrupt, didn't say a word. He just sat silently in the kitchen with the lights off, sipping cold coffee and staring out the window at the moonlit frost. His mind wouldn't stop racing. Why was a young girl like her out on the streets? No coat, no phone, no ID. Where was her family? Why hadn't anyone come looking? The next morning, Derek got up early to make breakfast, just scrambled eggs and toast. Nothing fancy. Malik was still asleep, but Sophie was already awake, sitting up with her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked startled when Derek entered the room. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded hesitantly. He placed a plate in front of her and sat across the table with his own. They ate mostly in silence. But eventually, she spoke. "I wasn't going to hurt anyone," she said, almost defensively. "I just didn't know where else to go." "I believe you," Derek said calmly. "No one's mad. You're safe here." Sophie stared at her plate for a moment, then added, "I left because it wasn't safe where I was." "Not for me." Derek leaned in, voice low and kind. "You don't have to tell me everything. Just know you're not alone." Sophie blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears again. "You don't even know me. Why help?" Derek thought for a moment, then answered, "Because someone helped me once when I needed it most. I never forgot. Maybe this is my turn." Later that day, Malik sat at the kitchen table, working on a puzzle. Sophie joined him, and for the first time, she smiled, a real smile, as Malik tried to teach her the corner piece trick. Derek watched them from the hallway, arms crossed, heart heavy but warm. He didn't have a lot. No fancy house. No big savings account. He worked long shifts at the warehouse just to keep the lights on. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, his home was sheltering someone who had nowhere else to go. And that meant everything. By nightfall, Sophie looked different. She was still quiet, still cautious, but there was color in her cheeks, warmth in her eyes. She helped with dishes without being asked. And when Derek offered her the couch again, she shook her head. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Derek replied. "You're a guest." Before bed, Malik walked up to her and handed her one of his favorite books. "It's a little kiddish," he said bashfully, "but it's funny." Sophie clutched it like it was something priceless. And for the first time, she whispered more than thank you. She said, "I haven't felt safe in a long time, but tonight I do." That night, as the wind howled outside and frost crept up the windows, Derek turned off the last light, checked on Malik, and peeked at the couch. Sophie was asleep, curled up with the book beside her. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't crying. She was at peace. The next morning, Derek woke up to something he hadn't seen in years. Not birds chirping, not Malik snoring, but the deep rumble of engines outside his window. He squinted through the curtains, and his heart skipped. 3 sleek, black SUVs were parked outside his tiny, weather-beaten house. The kind you see in movies. Windows tinted, engines still running. Derek threw on a hoodie and headed to the front door, confused and uneasy. Sophie was already awake, standing behind him, her face pale. Her eyes locked on the vehicles. Her body went still. Then, the door opened. From a middle SUV stepped out a well-dressed older man, his salt and pepper hair perfectly combed, his long coat flapping in the wind. Two large bodyguards flanked him on either side. The man looked around frantically, then his eyes landed on Sophie. "Sophie," he called out, voice cracking with relief. "Oh, thank God, you're safe." Sophie didn't move. Her hands clenched at her sides. Her breath quickened. "Dad," she whispered. Derek blinked. "Your dad." Before he could even process it, the man rushed forward and wrapped Sophie in a tight embrace. She didn't return it, but she didn't push him away either. The man turned to Derek. "She ran away after an argument last night," he said quickly. "We've been searching for her for hours. Every department, every contact. I'm her father, Charles Whitmore." Derek's eyes widened. Charles Whitmore. The name hit him like a slap. He'd seen it on billboards, on news articles, on Forbes lists. The man wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the most powerful businessmen in the state, with a net worth in the billions and real estate stretching across 3 cities. And that meant Sophie. She wasn't some abandoned runaway. She was an heiress. Derek stepped back, stunned. He looked at Sophie, who now stood with her head bowed, arms crossed tightly, avoiding everyone's eyes. Charles sighed, clearly exhausted. "She's been struggling since her mother passed. We're getting her help. But when I saw her missing last night, I thought the worst." He turned to Derek with sincere eyes. "Thank you. Thank you for taking her in. I don't know what could have happened if you hadn't opened that door." Derek nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. "She didn't tell us anything. We just saw a kid who needed help." Charles nodded, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a thick envelope and extended it toward Derek. "Please, just a token of thanks." Derek stared at it. It looked thick, real thick. Too thick. He didn't take it. "I didn't help her for money," he said simply. Charles looked surprised, but there was respect in his eyes. Sophie finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Can I say goodbye?" Charles gave her space. She turned to Derek and Malik. "I didn't mean to lie," she said, eyes glistening. "I just wanted to feel normal for once. Not like some headline." Derek smiled gently. "You don't owe us anything. You're just a kid who needed a place to rest. That's all we saw." Malik stepped forward and gave her a hug. "Thanks for helping me with my puzzle," he said. Sophie laughed softly, the first real smile Derek had seen on her face. "You're really smart, you know that?" Malik beamed. Then, Sophie looked at Derek. "I'll never forget this. Ever." He nodded. "Just promise me something." She tilted her head. "When someone knocks on your door one day and needs a little kindness, open it." She didn't speak, just nodded through teary eyes. As the SUVs pulled away, Derek stood at the doorway, watching the convoy disappear into the morning sun. The frost was starting to melt. Malik tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" Derek looked down at his son, then up at the sky. "We're going to be just fine, son. Because sometimes the world surprises you. Sometimes kindness to a stranger opens doors you never expected. And sometimes the girl on your couch turns out to be a millionaire's daughter running from a world that only saw her last name, not her heart. But in this house for one night, she was just Sophie." As the confusion settled and the bodyguards stepped away, a heavy silence filled the chilly morning air. Sophie turned to Derek. Her voice trembled, not from cold now, but from something deeper. "I didn't want to go back to a mansion that didn't feel like home," she said quietly. She looked up, tears glistening in her tired eyes. "I needed to feel real again." Derek just stood there listening. She took a breath. "After my mom died, everything changed. My dad buried himself in work. Meetings, flights, deals, everything but me. I had tutors, staff, security, people everywhere, but no one really there, you know?" She glanced over at Malik, who was leaning against the doorway, still in his pajamas. "I started having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't breathe sometimes. And no one noticed, not until I disappeared." She looked at Derek again. "Last night, I didn't want pity. I just wanted to know what it's like to be around people who care. Not for money, not for status. Just me." Derek was quiet for a long moment. What could he say? He was just a guy trying to stretch paychecks. A man with no fancy degrees, no private chef, no estate behind a gated driveway. But last night, he gave her something a mansion never could. Safety, warmth, kindness. I'm sorry you had to run away just to find that, he said finally. But I'm glad you knocked on our door. Sophie smiled, a soft, tired but genuine smile. Charles Whitmore stepped forward, his face more humbled now than before. The suits, the cars, the title, none of it mattered in this moment. I don't pretend to understand everything Sophie's been going through, he admitted, but I know I should have listened more. Been there more. He looked at Derek with honest gratitude. Thank you for taking care of my daughter. Most people would have turned her away, especially in this neighborhood. But you didn't. He reached in his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek silver business card, the kind that wasn't handed out lightly. I owe you more than words can say, Charles said, handing it to Derek. This has my direct number. If you ever need anything, job, favor, opportunity, you call me. Derek hesitated, then took the card slowly. He wasn't sure if he'd ever use it. He wasn't the type to ask for favors, but something about the gesture felt real. Thanks, he said simply. She took a breath. After my mom died, everything changed. My dad buried himself in work. Meetings, flights, deals, everything but me. I had tutors, staff, security, people everywhere, but no one really there, you know? She glanced over at Malik, who was leaning against the doorway, still in his pajamas. I started having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't breathe sometimes. And no one noticed, not until I disappeared. She looked at Derek again. Last night, I didn't want pity. I just wanted to know what it's like to be around people who care. Not for money. Not for status. Just me. Derek was quiet for a long moment. What could he say? He was just a guy trying to stretch paychecks. A man with no fancy degrees, no private chef, no estate behind a gated driveway. But last night, he gave her something a mansion never could. Safety, warmth, kindness. I'm sorry you had to run away just to find that, he said finally. But I'm glad you knocked on our door. Sophie smiled, a soft, tired but genuine smile. Charles Whitmore stepped forward, his face more humbled now than before. The suits, the cars, the title, none of it mattered in this moment. I don't pretend to understand everything Sophie's been going through, he admitted, but I know I should have listened more. Been there more. He looked at Derek with honest gratitude. Thank you for taking care of my daughter. Most people would have turned her away, especially in this neighborhood. But you didn't. He reached in his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek silver business card, the kind that wasn't handed out lightly. I owe you more than words can say, Charles said, handing it to Derek. This has my direct number. If you ever need anything, job, favor, opportunity, you call me. Derek hesitated, then took the card slowly. He wasn't sure if he'd ever use it. He wasn't the type to ask for favors, but something about the gesture felt real. Thanks, he said simply. Sophie smiled, a soft, tired but genuine smile. Charles Whitmore stepped forward, his face more humbled now than before. The suits, the cars, the title, none of it mattered in this moment. I don't pretend to understand everything Sophie's been going through, he admitted, but I know I should have listened more. Been there more. He looked at Derek with honest gratitude. Thank you for taking care of my daughter. Most people would have turned her away, especially in this neighborhood. But you didn't. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek silver business card, the kind that wasn't handed out lightly. I owe you more than words can say, Charles said, handing it to Derek. This has my direct number. If you ever need anything, job, favor, opportunity, you call me. Derek hesitated, then took the card slowly. He wasn't sure if he'd ever use it. He wasn't the type to ask for favors, but something about the gesture felt real. Thanks, he said simply. Sophie turned to Malik and knelt down to his level. Hey, she said softly, brushing a hand across his shoulder. That puzzle we worked on? You're going to finish it, right? Malik grinned. Of course. And next time, I'll let you do the corners. Sophie laughed, really laughed this time, and pulled him in for a quick hug. You're a good kid, Malik. Never stop being kind. Then she turned to Derek once more. You reminded me what home is supposed to feel like, she whispered. He looked at her gently. You're always welcome here, Sophie. With one last look at the little house, paint peeling, mailbox crooked, but full of warmth, she stepped into the SUV. The door shut behind her with a soft click. As the convoy pulled away down the narrow street, Derek stood there holding the silver card, his breath turning to clouds in the cold air. Sophie turned to Malik and knelt down to his level. "Hey," she said softly, brushing a hand across his shoulder. "That puzzle we worked on? You're gonna finish it, right?" Malik grinned. "Of course. And next time, I'll let you do the corners." Sophie laughed, really laughed this time, and pulled him in for a quick hug. "You're a good kid, Malik. Never stop being kind." Then she turned to Derek once more. "You reminded me what home is supposed to feel like," she whispered. He looked at her gently. "You're always welcome here, Sophie." With one last look at the little house, paint peeling, mailbox crooked, but full of warmth, she stepped into the SUV. The door shut behind her with a soft click. As the convoy pulled away down the narrow street, Derek stood there holding the silver card, his breath turning to clouds in the cold air. Back inside, Malik flopped onto the couch where Sophie had slept. He looked around thoughtfully. "Dad," he asked, "do you think she'll be okay?" Derek looked out the window for a second, then down at his son. "Yeah," he said, "I think she will. And I think we helped more than we even know." That night, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed, but because everything had. The old couch now held a memory. The tea kettle still warm. The puzzle still half done on the kitchen table. And on the counter, a silver business card. Not just a token of thanks, but maybe a door to something bigger. But Derek wasn't thinking about money or favors. He was thinking about the quiet moment in the kitchen, the cracked voice of a girl trying to feel human again, and the way kindness, no matter how small, could change a life. Because sometimes the richest people in the world aren't looking for gold. They're just looking for grace. 2 weeks later, Derek was fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen when his old flip phone rang. He wiped his hands on a towel and answered. "Hello." The voice on the other end was unmistakable. Charles Whitmore. Calm, polished, grateful. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "And I was hoping you and Malik would join us at an event this weekend. It's at my estate, just something small, well, small by my standards," he added with a chuckle. Derek hesitated. He'd never been to an estate, let alone one owned by a billionaire. But something told him it mattered. So he said yes. That Saturday, Derek put on his best shirt, the one he saved for holidays and job interviews. He combed Malik's hair twice, making sure his son looked sharp. As they pulled up to the Whitmore estate, Derek's jaw dropped. A mansion the size of a city block, glowing under golden lights. Sculpted gardens. Valets in black coats. Guests in suits that probably cost more than Derek's monthly rent. He held Malik's hand a little tighter. "I feel weird, Dad," Malik whispered. "You and me both," Derek replied. But before the nerves could settle in, a familiar voice called out. "Derek! Malik!" It was Sophie, smiling, in a simple dress and sneakers, running past the crowd like the party didn't matter. She hugged them both tightly. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "Come on, it's starting." Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and soft music. Waiters passed trays of hors d'oeuvres neither Derek nor Malik could pronounce. Derek felt out of place until Sophie took their hands and guided them to a special table right near the stage. Moments later, Charles stepped up to the microphone. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Good evening," he began. "Thank you all for being here. Tonight's event was meant to celebrate the launch of our new housing initiative, but it became something more personal." He paused. In the weeks that followed, things changed, but in the best way. Derek's business took off. Clients called nonstop. His story had spread across local news. People respected him not just as a handyman, but as a man of integrity. Malik started school at one of the best academies in the state, and still brought Sophie puzzles every weekend when she visited. Because yes, she kept visiting. No gatos, no chauffeurs, just Sophie, in jeans and sneakers, sitting on the same couch where she once cried herself to sleep. She helped Malik with homework, ate Derek's famous Sunday pancakes, and laughed more freely than she ever had before. Because sometimes family isn't about blood. It's not about last names, bank accounts, or big gates. It's about who shows up when you're lost, who opens their door, who makes you feel like you matter. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. Because one small act of kindness, like opening your door to a stranger, can change a life forever. And sometimes, it changes yours too.